A series to fully understand Putin and the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, an iron-fisted leader who has held the reins of power in Russia for over 20 years. Before the war in Ukraine, he was widely seen as a masterful strategist, a new czar capable of restoring his nation's glory. After the war began, however, a deeply entangled Putin seemed to transform into a beleaguered, almost cartoonish figure. To truly understand the past and present of this new czar, we must turn the clock back more than half a century, to a time before the red flag had fallen. The starting point of our first story is the subtle relationship between the Putin family and the heart of Soviet power. The core reason Putin was later able to enter the KGB was that he was born into a staunchly loyal Soviet family. While Putin was not the child of the Soviet elite, his family had an unbreakable connection to its leadership. Putin's grandfather was named Spiridon Putin. His life can be summed up in 2 words: legendary chef. Spiridon was born a peasant in the Tver province of the Russian Empire. As a young man, he left his village for the imperial capital of St. Petersburg to study culinary arts. His motivation for becoming a chef was simple: to make a good life for himself in the big city. What he didn't expect was that after making a name for himself in St. Petersburg, he would be noticed by a very powerful figure. One day, sometime after the October Revolution of 1917, the 40-year-old Spiridon received a notice inviting him to the village of Gorky in the Moscow region. It was only upon his arrival that Spiridon discovered, to his astonishment, that the person who wanted to taste his cooking was none other than the supreme leader of Soviet Russia, Vladimir Lenin. From that moment on, the trajectory of Spiridon's life changed completely. He went from being a famous chef in St. Petersburg to a personal chef for the Soviet leadership in Moscow. Because his political background was clean and reliable, and his skills were deeply appreciated by the Soviet leaders, he continued to work for Lenin's widow, Nadezhda Krupskaya, after Lenin's death. When Stalin came to power, he brought Spiridon into his own inner circle. Until his retirement, Spiridon served as a key chef within the party's logistical system. But Spiridon was no Yevgeny Prigozhin. In that era, serving the Soviet central leadership was not only a chef's highest honor, but also an extremely dangerous job. To ensure his own safety, Spiridon not only lacked the audacity to abuse his position for personal gain, but was also an extremely taciturn man. To enhance his political credibility, he demanded that his children also serve the Soviet Union in any way they could. Influenced by this family environment, his son, Vladimir Putin's father, Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin, became both a tragic and a fortunate figure. Born in 1911, shortly before his father became a Kremlin chef, the younger Vladimir quickly embarked on a path of service to the Soviet Union. In the 1930s, he joined the Soviet Red Navy, serving in the submarine corps, which was widely considered the toughest branch. Although he had been retired for years when the Soviet-German War broke out, he immediately answered the party's call to arms and became a member of a sabotage detachment under the NKVD, the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. During the siege of Leningrad, he was severely wounded by shrapnel from a German grenade or mortar shell, which left him with a lifelong leg injury. In a stroke of luck amid tragedy, the injury allowed him to temporarily leave the brutal Soviet-German front, where the mortality rate was incredibly high. His family back in St. Petersburg was not so fortunate. Before the war, Vladimir's first son, Albert, had died in infancy in the 1930s. During the siege of Leningrad, his second son, also newly born, died of diphtheria. His wife, Putin's mother Maria, nearly starved to death several times during the siege. The only comfort was that, by the end of the war, the couple had at least both survived. After WW2, Putin's father, as a decorated and disabled veteran, joined the Communist Party. He was assigned to the Yegorov railcar plant in Leningrad, where he worked as a foreman and technician. He also served as the party secretary of his workshop, responsible for organizing the political education and ideological work of the laborers. With their lives finally back on track, the couple decided to have another child. In 1952, their third son was born. This child was our protagonist, Vladimir Putin. Logically, with a grandfather who cooked for Stalin and a father who was a decorated veteran of the Red Army, you would expect the young Putin to have been an honorable, obedient, and well-behaved boy. The reality was the exact opposite. In his youth, Putin showed none of his family's positive traits. In elementary school, he revealed an unruly side. He hated the constraints of the classroom, was often late for school, and his grades were mediocre at best. In his spare time, his favorite activity was to look for trouble and get into fights with classmates, friends, and even young punks on the street. However, in Putin's own telling, while he may have been a young punk in Leningrad, he never wanted to be one. He later explained that in the courtyard of his childhood home on Baskov Lane, the children lived by a small-scale law of the jungle. As a boy who was neither tall nor particularly strong, he had no natural advantage. The only way to avoid being bullied by bigger kids was to be exceptionally aggressive. This wasn't just Putin making excuses for his rough past. When he got to the upper grades of elementary school and found that simple brawling was no longer enough to win, he made a major decision: to learn how to really fight. In 1963, a 13-year-old Putin found the Sambo coach Anatoly Raklin. Sambo, a traditional Russian martial art, is a form of unarmed combat that places a heavy emphasis on technique. After a brief encounter, Raklin discovered that the small boy possessed a rare endurance and a versatile skill set. Although Putin's motive for learning Sambo was impure, Raklin saw that these qualities could guide him in a better direction. Raklin first persuaded Putin's parents to support their son's training as much as possible. Then, during their sessions, he patiently mentored Putin, channeling his street fighting energy into the disciplined and goal-oriented pursuit of competitive sports. This disciplined training completely changed the young Putin. In 1964, Raklin became one of the first Soviet experts in judo. Putin stopped learning Sambo and switched to judo, which shared many similarities with Sambo but had a global reach. Under Raklin's training, Putin not only became a judo black belt by the age of 18, but also changed his lax attitude toward his studies, earning a spot at school number 281, one of Leningrad's top high schools. It was during high school that the now transformed Putin developed a new dream: to join the KGB. Most people who know about Putin's early life remember that he was a KGB agent, but his reason for joining was definitely not just to get a secure government job. While the KGB is portrayed in the Western media as a sinister organization for internal repression and external infiltration, in the eyes of a Soviet teenager like Putin, it had a completely different image. Putin later said that the popular Soviet film Shield and Sword, which tells the story of a Soviet intelligence officer's heroic struggle in the heart of Nazi Germany, was a major reason he chose the path of the KGB. But even without this film, the KGB would have been Putin's ideal career choice. Since its inception, the KGB's emblem has been a shield and a sword, the shield symbolizing the defense of the motherland from enemies within and without, and the sword symbolizing the punishment of the nation's enemies. For a child who grew up in post-war Leningrad, listening to war stories, this imagery was filled with heroism and patriotism. In the Soviet context, the KGB was not the evil secret police of the West, but the nation's invisible guardians. Their work was depicted as the ultimate contest of intellect, courage, and willpower, not only full of mystery and nobility, but also the absolute embodiment of justice. For a boy like Putin,
The KGB was the most powerful, most mysterious, and most disciplined system in the entire Soviet Union. It held a natural attraction for a child who revered strength. Furthermore, the KGB recruited only the most loyal, intelligent, physically fit, and well-vetted individuals, the best of the best. For a Soviet kid from a family of proven loyalists, being selected was the ultimate elite certification. Joining the KGB was therefore the greatest professional dream Putin could imagine. Fueled by this dream, a 15-year-old Putin made a remarkable choice. On his day off, he went to the KGB headquarters in Leningrad, a building at number 4 Lytany Avenue in St. Petersburg, that remains a famous historical site to this day. He walked straight up to the public reception desk and asked the officer on duty point blank, "How can I get a job here?" Seeing this incredibly enthusiastic teenager, the KGB officer didn't just throw him out. He first explained that the KGB does not accept walk-ins. Then he clearly told Putin that to become a member of the KGB, he should first consider serving in the military, or even better, enrolling in the law department of a prestigious university. With this information, the young Putin left Lytany Avenue. From that moment on, the law school at Leningrad State University became his one and only goal. 2 years later, at the age of 18, Putin proudly walked through the doors of Leningrad State University. And that is where the next part of our story begins.